What's going on, folks? We're just gonna do something very simple, but I think is definitely needed. This is actually talking about sinker size. And the bulk of the context of what I'm gonna be talking about here is just your bullet style tungsten sinkers for Texas rigging. But we will, this same principle that I'm gonna talk about when you're choosing your sinker size will go across the board from shaky edge to Ned rigs, Carolina rig size, basically your weight size, anything that has a weight in it in general. This same principle is going to pretty much apply, because what we're going to talk about has a lot to do not only with just fall rate, but it's going to have a lot to do with just fish behavior in general, and which ultimately determines what size sinker that you guys are going to be using. And this is, you know, obviously we can get into the weeds when you're talking about sinker size. It's a very subjective subject. You know, we can talk about a lot of different techniques, and it can get really in the weeds because there's a lot of different styles and a lot of different sizes. But basically what we're going to talk about is if you guys are just starting and if you're looking for somewhere to start when it comes to sinker size, this is what this video is going to be about. You looking for mummy? Brooks is looking for mummy, not for sinker sizes right now. You gonna chill for me? I guess that means he's gonna chill. Anyway, we'll start off talking from the smallest to the largest. For the most part, when I'm talking about using bullet style tungsten sinkers, as light as I'm gonna go is almost always gonna be an 1/8 ounce. And I'm gonna go as heavy as a 1 ounce for most applications. And I'm gonna walk you through why I use a 1/8, why I use 3/16, 3/8, 5/16, and a 1 ounce. What I like to use them for application wise, and why I think it's best in the different scenarios that I would use each sinker in. Starting off, the weight sinker size that I use most often when I tie on a Texas rig and I'm about to go down the bank and start flipping isolated wood, isolated targets, docks, dock posts, is gonna be a 3/16 ounce sinker. That's almost always where I start. I use this guy on, you can see I've got it on just a stick bait right here. I use it on small creature baits, brush hog style baits. I'm going to start off with a 3/16 size sinker. And this is why. Typically if I'm fishing shallow wood, I'm fishing dock pilings, they're probably going to be fairly shallow. And most of the time when I'm flipping or pitching at isolated targets, I'm probably fishing in extremely shallow off-colored water. Off-colored water, I like a little bit slower fall. And the 3/16 is that happy medium, especially if you're throwing like a stick bait like what I have here, 3/16 ounce sinker. It has the perfect rate of fall. Rate of fall is absolutely essential when it comes to flipping and pitching. Probably more so than any other technique that you'll ever do. When you're flipping and pitching, your fall rate is bar none the most important thing to trigger strikes. So a 3/16 ounce doesn't hang too much. It gives me that nice, you know, lifelike fall, and it's just, that's what works best for me when I'm doing just general flipping and pitching. So 3/16 ounce, that's a good be all do all for me. When I'm starting to get into some of the bigger, bulkier plastics, craws that have appendages on them, even when I'm fishing around lily pads, when I'm fishing around a little bit heavier structure. The next size up for me is going to be the 3/8 ounce. That's the size that I like to use next. 3/8 ounce is what I'm going to use when I'm using a little bit bigger, bulkier plastic. When I'm using things that have a lot of appendages on them, that have boot tails on them, stuff that's going to move a little bit more water, you need a little bit more weight to get them to do exactly what they're supposed to do. So I'm going to step up to a 3/8 ounce. I'm going to be targeting shallow structure, back to docks, fish. I don't have a fish. All right, 3/8 ounce sinkers are going to be doing the same thing. Isolated wood, dock pilings, fishing extremely shallow, but your sinker size has a lot to do with the style bait that you're using. So if I have a bait that has a lot of appendages on it, it's gonna sink a lot slower. So I may have to upsize to get the same rate of fall. So that's why I'll step up to a 3/8 ounce sinker. My next size is probably gonna be the 5/16. When I get into 5/16, I'm almost always fishing some type of vegetation, lily pads, hydrilla, little thicker vegetation that I need some penetration on. I almost never use a 5/16 when I'm just flipping isolated wood or fishing isolated targets, dock pilings, wood, rock. For me, it's just a little too quick. However, there is a time when having something that falls a little bit quicker works out. During the cold times of the year, a lot of times fish are very lethargic and they don't want to bite. You can actually make the fish bite a lot easier when you have a bait that drops in and falls extremely fast. So if you flip a bait into a laydown or a crappy brush pile, something like that, and you've got an extremely fast fall, sometimes that can trigger a fish to bite. And that's when I'm going to use a little bit heavier sinker like this, the 5/16. You throw that on a stick bait, when you flip it into a laydown, it falls immediately. It goes right down to the bottom. So a light sinker isn't always the way to go. When fish really aren't biting, sometimes it's not the bait, sometimes it's not the color, sometimes it's not the profile of the bait you're using, sometimes maybe it's just the fall is too slow. So if you speed up that fall, sometimes that can trigger a strike. It's a reaction strike. In the same way that you throw a jerk bait out and you work it extremely fast and it's really erratic, when you put a heavier sinker on a bait like a stick bait, a small straight tail worm, or even some of your creature baits, it's going to fall differently, it's going to fall more erratically, and that can trigger a strike sometimes. Now we're going to jump up to the mat daddy weights. Now these weights are typically going to be mostly for when I'm fishing extremely heavy vegetation, when I'm punching mats, hydrilla mats, or if I have a really big bulky plastic, or maybe just I'm fishing in deeper water. If I'm flipping grass or milfoil or coontail grass and in 7, 8, 9 foot of water, obviously I'm gonna need a little bit bigger weight to penetrate and get my bait down to where it is, and it just makes me more efficient. One thing you always want to think about is weather as well. We don't talk a lot about this, but if it's very windy, I need more weight to get my bait down to where it is. If I'm typically going out and I'm throwing a 3/16 ounce sinker, but tomorrow I'll come back to the same place and I got 20-mile-an-hour wind and waves crashing in where I fished yesterday, that 3/16 ounce sinker is not going to put my bait in the same place that a 3/8 ounce sinker will. So you need to always think about the weather and the conditions that you're fishing. When I'm throwing the 1 ounce sinker, heavy vegetation, almost always. Can you throw a 1 ounce sinker around wood and docks? Of course you can. Most of the time, keep in mind, this is a general conversation about sinker size and what works best, generally speaking. Generally speaking, this is going to be for nothing but heavy vegetation. 1 ounce, ounce and a quarter, ounce and a half, 2 ounce sinkers, strictly for penetrating that heavy vegetation. Heavy milfoil, heavy hydrilla, heavy lily pads. That's when you're going to see me pull out the 1 ounce sinker. Only other situation that I will hardly ever use a 1 ounce sinker or something this size or this heavy is probably going to be when I'm trying to fish a Carolina rig over deep structure. Fishing a Carolina rig, you want a heavy sinker, you want something you can throw out there and make a long cast, and as well, you can keep it on the bottom and maintain bottom contact. So that's when I like to use the 1 ounce sinker. So that's a general guide on how you can select your sinker size when you're throwing Texas rig and other baits too. This concept pretty much works for any type of presentation you guys had, whether it's a shaky head, a net rig, Carolina rig, and anything where you've got to select the sinker size or the weight size. This general concept works for all of that.